right. Welcome back, everyone. I hope that you enjoyed your break. I hope that it went well and that you got something to drink, something to eat, maybe chatted with a few people. Since we did introductions last time, we're just going to jump right into this section of the presentation because we're really going to get down to brass tacks. So we talked in the first session about the series development process. The first method of doing that, basically my method of doing that, as you go from the series idea to the individual book idea to the chapter and scene ideas. So we go from big ideas to small ideas. And that's the progression that we're going to make. So to review, when we talked about a series, we talked about talking about who, what characters do you have in your series? What is the series about? Your setting, where does the series take place? How does everything work together? Those type of things. When does the series happen? That affects your setting and how things happen and how big your series can be. If your series happens over an extended period of time, it can be even larger. Those are all things that are related to what we called the big idea. The big idea is basically just the idea of the series. And we looked at how we look at those different things in Plotter and in other software. Now what we're going to talk about is we're going to get down to the level of the book idea. So we've come from the giant level of the series, we've come down, and we're going to look at each individual book in the series. Now, there's a number of ways to do this. Some people plan out their whole series at one time. So they sit down and they figure out what's going to happen in detail in each book and plot all of that out. Some of you are more of discovery writers and you get into that and you go, oh my goodness, I'm not going to do this. You just start writing the book and you see kind of where things go and you kind of have a general direction that you're heading. That works fine with a series as long as you kind of stay on the same general direction and don't have to rework the series several times as you go along. That's one of the results. That's one of the things that results in stalling. But on the other hand, as I said last hour, most writers are not pure plotters or pure discovery writers. So most discovery writers actually plot at some point or another. Just sometimes their plots are not as robust and not as large and not as full as someone who's a true plotter who outlines every single detail. There are some authors that write the last sentence of their book before they write the first one. I am not nearly on that level. I am also more of a blended writer in that I have a pretty robust outline, I have a pretty robust plot, but also as the book goes along and the characters do their things, sometimes you discover that the way the book comes out is a little bit different than what you had planned. If it's a little bit different, that works well into a series. But if it's a lot different, sometimes that can create problems for you down the road. The main thing is to not let it get you stuck. But even if you're a discovery writer, here are the key things that you need to make an individual book within the series work. Okay, number one, you need the connection. Remember, we talked about how each book has to have something that connects it to the others. That's what makes it a series, whether that's the setting, the historical time period, the characters, different things like that, whatever that is, that connection is what makes this a series. So for a book to fit into the series, the very first thing you want to look at with your book idea is how is this connected? Now, if you're writing a book with a series of characters, like we talked about the series Die Hard, if John McClane is the main character, it's part of the Die Hard series. It's really not that difficult. In the Star Trek books that we talked about, if it's set in the Star Trek universe, it's a Star Trek book and can be considered part of the Star Trek, at least a part of the Star Trek fandom and the Star Trek overall series, even if it's not a part of the original series. Okay, so the first thing is the connection. How is this book connected to the rest of the series? The second is the satisfying plot. One of the most difficult parts about a middle book of a trilogy is giving it a satisfying plot, because really what you're doing is taking the reader from book A, where the action begins to rise and we begin to see the central conflict of the series, to book 3, where we know that that resolves and the series ends in some way that is satisfying. But each book must have its own satisfying plot. Now, with book 1, that's generally a little bit easier. You end it as the rising action has come to a climax and the sleuth or the main character or whatever has some kind of a resolution and is ready to move on to book number 2. So there's a hook that drags you into book number 2, but book number 1 resolves very nicely. Book number 3 is easy to do that. You build on the rising action that came at the climax, perhaps, that's coming out of book 2, and it's rising to in book 3 that has a series of try-fails, and ultimately your main character triumphs or your main character fails, depending upon the type of book that you're writing. But that middle book can be a little bit tough to get a satisfying plot, because there needs to be a story as well as that journey that gets us from point A to point B. So one of the things with each book is you need to at least plan out something of a satisfying plot. What happens in this book? Not what happens that relates to the overall series, but that makes this book satisfying on its own. Ideally, your series book should be that if someone picks up book 2, they should be able to read it, understand the story, and go back to book 1 to get the beginning part of the story and still be satisfied with book 2. They should still be satisfactory as standalones. And that's a really tough thing to do. And as much as I endeavor to do that with the Capital City Murders series and some of my other books, really, it's truly, you almost need to go back to the first book and start there to get, or at least part of the books, to start there and get the background behind the story. Now, Capital City Murders was a little easier to make each one because he moves locations to make each one standalone, but some other books that is actually really tough. So the next thing is the hook or the resolution. At the end of the book, what hooks the reader to go into the next book, or in the case of the final book in the series, how is everything resolved? Are there loose ends left behind that the reader's really going to wonder about? Now, it's fine if you want to leave 1 or 2 of those that are kind of vague, that might lead the reader into another book should you decide to continue the series. However, you don't want there to be big things unresolved at the end of a series, kind of like at the end of a book. You need to resolve the book, make it a complete story, even though there's a hook to the next book. And at the end of the series, you want to resolve the entire series, even though there may be a hook that allows you to continue the series or do spin-offs. You want it to be a satisfying resolution for the reader. The other thing about your book idea is you want to avoid the sagging middle. Now, we talked about that being as a part of the series, that you wanted to avoid that sagging middle in the second book where it's just a part of the journey. It's the exact same thing in the book idea. Now, one of the things that I do to do this is I use outline templates to help me. Now, those outline templates help me to get my pacing right and to make sure that I haven't left gaps there in the middle that make it so that part of the book sags. Now, when we're looking at these individual books and how they fit in the series, we need to look at some basic questions. So we look at who. Remember when we talked about the big idea, we talked about one of the things is your characters. So we look at who in this book makes it so this book fits in with the rest of the series. Are these relatives of the main character, or are they somehow in the same occupation as the main character? For instance, we use the Highland Chiefs series as an example. The example in that particular book would be that the clan of Highland Chiefs is the connection between the books in the series. So is the when, which is the time frame that the books are set in. If you have historical novels and you move from event to event within a specific time frame, that when is what often ties the books together. And the other thing that can allow the book to fit into the series is the where, the setting. Remember, we talked about that, about the setting of the Highlands in Scotland and the Highland Chiefs. And so we've talked about different books where the setting, like the Star Trek universe as well, where the setting is what carries things from book to book and ensures that they're in the same series. Now, the next thing you're going to ask about the book is where it fits in the series arc, if there is one. So if there's a series arc story and you're not just writing Jack Reacher or James Bond type style things where it's just an action story after an action story after an action story, where does it fit in the series arc? Is this the introduction and the rising action? Is this book 2 where there should be some tri-fails and some more rising action? And this is what helps you involve the sagging, helps you avoid the sagging middle in those trilogies. Or is it book 3 where there's a resolution? Now, obviously, if your series is longer than this, you need to spread these different parts of the series arc actually out over your series. And what I often do is if I'm writing a longer series like that, I'll use a template, like an outlet or a plotter template, like, for example, I'll use the hero's journey, for instance, to cover several different books. So overall, my hero has a journey throughout those several books in the series that he follows, and that gives him a rising and falling action, and it helps me to pace the series properly so you avoid those books that are just sagging books, because when you have a longer series, sometimes that sagging middle can be 3 books long, and it's something that you really don't want. So where is the book in the series arc? So when you're looking at the individual books, that's what you look at. So here's a real life example. This happens to be one of mine. This is a really old series, well, really old in my writing lifetime. It was published a dozen years ago when I was first starting out and really didn't know what I was doing in the self-publishing world, but it still turned out to be a great series. So there are 3 books in the series, and Redemption starts out with Sam becoming a lawyer while he's in prison, which isn't terribly plausible, but we made it work anyway. And so he gets out of prison. We see the central conflict of Sam versus his past and his own faults. And we see how he uses his strengths and his faults to help other people around him, which is really what Sam's goal is to help other people. Now, in Temptation, Sam has become very prideful because he's very good at what he does. And so he encounters a lying client who is deceptive to him, and his lies are good. So Sam has to figure out what those lies are and how to deal with that. Like, as a lawyer, does he try to win, or does he pass on winning in favor of embracing the truth? And then Confession kind of wraps things all up because there's kind of a religious undertone to all of the books and something about Sam's mother and what the things that she believes about him. And we resolve all those things in Confession, and it forces Sam into a position where at the end of it, he has to make a major decision about his life. Now, the book was left enough open that if I really wanted to, I could have pursued it and added another to the series or added a prequel to the series or something along that line. But really, I resolved things in such a way with Confession that I have not gone back to that series yet because I really haven't wanted to. And because I fit it there, and there's a lot of reasons for that, but that's why I resolved it all within a trilogy. So the trilogy was planned. Now, this happened long before I had something like Plotter. Okay. But Plotter allows you to build this series inside in a series Bible, kind of like I showed you the last time. And we're going to look at one of those really quickly again at the one that I had for Capital City Murders. And we basically looked at those different things. I look at the different books and what's going to happen in each in a progression that relates to the overall series and the overall character arc of basically in that series, from Nick going as being a photographer, and that's his focus, to focusing more and more on these mysteries and things that he's solving, to the point that when he's done with the series, he's basically going to be in the same position where he's going to be faced with a choice. What do I do about my life? Do I become an amateur sleuth and go use my detecting powers to go solve crimes? Or do I continue to pursue this career as a photographer? And now that I'm not on the road all the time, I can get away from all these mysteries that I keep encountering. So it's kind of the same thing. We built a series Bible, which has all kinds of books, all of the books in it, and all the outlines of the various different books, and an overall timeline for the entire series. That's basically, we've decided where each book fits within the series. And the biggest issue with this trilogy, especially as I was a relatively young writer as far as in the publishing realm, was avoiding the sagging middle with temptation, was not allowing temptation to become a problem for me and to become the sagging middle. The chapter ideas. We're going to talk about chapter ideas because, of course, now once we have the book, holistically, we say, okay, now we know where this book fits in to this series overall. We know how the plot fits. We know what the connection is. We know what the setting is. We know what all those things. And then we come down to plotting the chapters and the parts within that book. Now, this is where I find Plotter and tools like it incredibly helpful. And I'll have a resources page on my website that I was telling you about when I started this thing. But the biggest thing that Plotter allows me to do is, first of all, it allows me to use templates of various different accepted plot types to make sure that my pacing is correct, that I'm on pace and I'm not hitting that sagging middle, but that I'm also aiming in the right direction, that I'm not going to mess up my series by having a plot that's completely different and completely out there from the rest of the series. Now, there's a ton of books I recommend to you on plotting. If you're a discovery writer, the book Take Off Your Pants, as funny as the name is a fantastic resource for basically learning to create a somewhat unstructured story that's still plotted enough that you can make it fit into your series and make it fit into other different things that you're doing. But there are much more structured books. Story Engineering, the Snowflake Method. The Snowflake Method has a software that goes with it. If you buy the book, you get the software for free, and that software will even integrate with Plotter and other types of plotting software. There's $1 Million Outlines by Dave Farland. There's Story Engineering. There's Save the Cat, and the new Save the Cat wrote a novel. And all these different things that you can use to plan out the plotting of your books and the plotting of your stories within those books. Discovering writing often leads, as I've said a couple times, often leads to replanning the series. So be careful. Now, planning one at a time and kind of leaving the overall series arc more vague, or writing a series where you kind of have a static set of characters and it's really the plot and the things like that that drive the series, can be a solution that allows you to be a little bit looser and to not plot quite as strictly as you might have to if you really want a series to follow a very firm trajectory. So that's how that works. Now, I recommend that you go through and plot those individual chapters. You don't have to go down as far as individual scenes, but you can. That's the style that I like to do. But it is everybody has their own writing style, and I've met so many people who use different tools in so many different ways that I will never tell you that you can't do something a different way. In fact, I will always tell you that if something feels super awkward to you, as far as writing is concerned, and it makes writing harder for you, don't do that. Do the things that make writing easier for you and make it something that you enjoy. Okay, the next thing I'm going to talk about hits home to me extremely. Like I talked about in the first session, In my confession time, essentially, I had a series. It did not go the way I wanted it to. It did not go as well as I would have liked it to. And essentially, part of that was we were rushing things. So, in this particular case, I want to talk about timeline, like how long it actually takes to write a series. Because the answer to this question depends entirely on you. Now, we tried, because I was writing full time. The guy I was working with was retired, so he didn't have other commitments, so he could make writing really his primary, writing and marketing this book, his primary thing. Now, that didn't end up working out for a variety of reasons, but here's the thing. We were trying to write the series way too fast. First of all, there's an emotional drain every time you finish a book, regardless of how long that book is, and a time when you need a breather and you need to just relax for a while and let your muse kind of glory in the fact that you finished something and you wrote the end. So that is really, really important. So if you don't give yourself that time, now for a full-time writer, sometimes that can be a day or 12 hours or a couple of days. That's fine if that's what you can do. But many people work full-time jobs too. Really, if you're writing intensely on the weekends and writing a little bit throughout the week, maybe you need a week or two off. So you need to really give yourself that space. Second of all, you need time to revise and rewrite the book and then send it through editors and beta readers and all that kind of things to get it polished, regardless of whether you're going to you're going to publish it yourself and do the self-publishing route, or if you're going to send it to an agent or an editor. An agent or an editor, the cleaner your book is when they get it, the better it is for them. So make life easy on them and make your book as clean as possible before you hand it over. It's really, really important, right? So you need to allow yourself time for that before you start into the next book. Or even if you're one of those people that can start into the next book while you're editing the other one, your pace is definitely going to be slower. So give yourself time, pace yourself. Give yourself the opportunity to write at a sustainable pace that your muse can handle. The reason is quite simple. If you don't, you will burn out. If you don't, you will eventually stall because you'll sit down and ask your muse to show up when it's time for you to write, and she will quite simply tell you no. So we want to avoid writer's block and that kind of things at all costs. So that means you have to pace yourself and write at a pace that's comfortable for you. I often tell people if you write a single page every day, at the end of a year, you'll have a 365-page book. That's pretty good. If that's the pace that you can work with, then in releasing your series, a book every year, year and a half is absolutely fine. Now, if you're going to do this for a living, there are some other aspects to that you need to understand before you have to maintain a certain pace. But there are ways to give yourself breathers, give yourself time off, and enable yourself to keep going in the way that you want to keep going. Take breaks when you have to, not too long, but take breaks. Write stuff other than what is in your series, whether that is short stories, whether it's spin-offs of your series, whether it's blog posts. If you're like me, I do a lot of freelance writing so I have a lot of interesting topics I write on a lot of the time. And that gives me a nice diversion from fiction that clears my mind and lets me come back to it fresh. So write other things that allow you to come back to that fresh, especially when you're in that revision process. Give it some time to rest before you look at it again. You'll see more of your errors. You can fix them easier before you have to hand it off to an editor. And so you can work that way. Stop whenever you're ready. So if you are done with a series and you absolutely are at the point where you just despise it, stop whenever you're ready. Now, a part of this is we want to honor our fans as well. If our fans have followed us through this journey and we've said, we've got this 7-book series coming, and you end it at the sixth book, that's actually absolutely fine. If that's when you need to stop because you're ready, end it there. But in doing so, honor your fans. Give them a resolution and deliver resolution every time with every single book. But don't burn yourself out. As my saying goes, don't set yourself on fire to keep somebody else warm. Okay, how do you keep writing every day? Well, here's some of my tips. First of all, plan ahead. What I mean by plan ahead is you set writing appointments with yourself and you keep them. I talk about this a lot in my writing book that talks about writing as a business. And that's one of the key principles in that book. Set yourself appointments for writing and keep them. Tell your family, your dog, your friends, whoever you need to tell that, hey, this is when I'm writing. Plan meals ahead, whatever you need to do, but don't miss your writing appointments. Write every day. If that's a half an hour a day, if it's an hour a day, whatever that looks like, keep those writing appointments. Second of all, when you stop writing in the middle of the day, leave yourself on a cliffhanger. Don't allow yourself to stop writing. Give yourself that cliffhanger you would give the reader that makes you, when you start writing again, you're excited about writing because you want to see what happens next. Okay, don't revise as you go. Please don't revise as you go. You will create faster and cleaner first drafts by finishing your draft first and then going back to revise. If you go back and revise as you're drafting, it tends to create editing problems for you later on. So stop revising, finish drafting. Next point is listen to your characters. Now, sometimes your characters are going to tell you, we want to go this way. We don't want to go this way. That plot you had laid out, that's really funny. That's great, but that's not going to work for us because you get to know them as you move along. And hopefully, if you have the same characters throughout your series, you've got to know them well enough. You kind of know when they might go off the rails, and you can either bring them back because you really want them to adhere to this plot, or you can listen to what they're saying and follow them and see where it goes. Okay, but listen to your characters. Sometimes your characters will have the best ideas, and that will make your series that much better. Now, the last thing on this particular slide is listen to realize the folly of perfection. Okay, your book and your story is never going to be perfect. And here's the thing you have to realize: writers see things that readers never see. So we just sweat over those little details, and there are things readers will never see in your books. So I'll give you an example. In the Capital City Murders books, I found what I consider to be it's a pretty obvious error in the Hanging in Helena book. Now, it's not huge, it's not plot stopping, but it's an error that I don't like seeing in that book. And where I caught it was when I was listening to the audiobook recording of the book, and I listened to it and I said, oh my goodness, that is not good. I really wish that wasn't in there. But of course, by that point, it's written, the audiobook is recorded. There's really not much I can do about going back and changing it without literally spending thousands of dollars to get rid of that one error. I have gotten one email from a reader about an error in Hanging in Helena, and it was not that one. In that particular book, I have Nick going into a bar and he orders a huckleberry beer of some sort. And basically, the guy emailed me and told me that that particular brewery does not have that type of huckleberry beer, but they have a huckleberry stout that's really good. So the thing that he noticed was not even the plot error that I noticed, was not even the things that I noticed about the book. It was that there was a different beer at that brewery than the one that I had put in the book. So believe me, first of all, you're never going to get it perfect. Second of all, even if you do, a reader is going to find something that is not even related, or they're just going to read and absorb your books and enjoy them without even realizing or acknowledging that that error is there. We want to strive for getting your books as great as you can before you release them, but realize when you start, especially when you're embarking on a series, that there is no hope for being absolutely perfect. There just isn't. The last thing I'm going to say, though, is that I do want you, when you're planning your series, to be ambitious. So, the best goals, the ones that make us stretch, especially in the writing realm, are ones that push our limits a little bit. You can figure out your writing pace, you can figure out, and there's all kinds of planning tools that enable you to do that. So you can figure out kind of what you can do and what you can't do when it comes to writing, and how fast you can do it, and how quickly you can produce a series. And then you can stretch those goals a little bit and be ambitious. And a lot of this depends on you and your lifestyle and how you live and how you write and what your goals are. But the biggest key is that while you want to be ambitious, you don't want to be ridiculous. So our initial plan for Capital City Murders was we were doing what was called 50 and 50. We were going to release 50 novellas in 50 months. Now, some of you may have gone, and some people, when I told them that, they said, "You guys are crazy." The thing was, I poo-pooed them at the time and said, "No, we're not crazy. This is something we can do." But they were absolutely right. Our goals were ridiculous. There was no way that we could produce high quality, the right kind of books in that limited amount of time unless that was the only thing that we were doing. And it simply wasn't. Okay. So I want you to be ambitious. I want you to have goals that stretch you, that make you work to accomplish them. But don't be ridiculous with your plans with your series. Now, a friend of mine has a thing that she calls a 12-month rolling writing calendar. And what I like about it is there's a lot of built-in flexibility. So we have goals for the years, but as you finish one project, you move on to the next, realizing that whether or not you're on time or behind for that project matters less than the fact that you know what goals are next for you and you know what you're doing next. Yes, we want to achieve our goals, but if you have a root canal and you're out for 2 weeks, or in 2020, if you had COVID and you're out for a couple of weeks, there's absolutely nothing you can do about that. And it shouldn't create stress in your life because you have to come back to writing a little later than you had planned. You have to give yourself latitude and freedom to be a human being, not a writing robot. And I'm as guilty of this as anybody. I tend to be so driven that then when I don't achieve what I'm going for, I get really upset with myself and down on myself. And that is not a good thing. And it's not a position that you want to put yourself in. So when it comes to your writing goals, be reasonable and forgive yourself if you don't make them. Okay, the final thing I'm going to tell you about perfect series plotting is there is no perfect series plotting. There is a perfect series plotting for you. What I've outlined in these last couple hours is ideas that I have that are broad ideas in a lot of ways. They're like, these are the ways that you can do this. This is a good way to plan. Go from big to small. Develop your ideas that way, right? But they are not absolutely necessary. None of these steps is something that if you skipped it or did it in a different order, that suddenly your series wouldn't work and you're not a real writer for some reason. Ignore all the self-talk that tells you things like that. The perfect series plotting is what works for you. Now, I'm going to recommend that you at least loosely outline your series and your novels. I'm going to recommend that at least you have an idea of what's going to happen in the various chapters, if it's at all possible, or that if you're a discovery writer, you have an outline that's loose enough that gives you the freedom to discover things as you go and allows you to change your series and flow your series with whatever your characters happen to do. Whether you start with your big series idea as a setting and a place, or as a series of events, or whether you start that with a group of characters and you set them on an adventure to see what happens, it doesn't matter. There is no right or wrong. And anyone tells you they have the perfect formula for writing a series or a novel, they're wrong. They're absolutely wrong. In fact, writers often give writers the worst advice. Here's the thing. Listen to your gut. Listen to who you are. Plan your series in a way that works for you using the tools that work for you. Plotter and Scrivener may not work for you at all. You may be an Excel spreadsheet and Google Docs person. It doesn't matter. You can do this any way that works for you. The methods are really very general and they're set that way on purpose. You have a lot of freedom within any kind of a system like this to do it your own way and follow your own personality. Now, last thing before I take questions, I'm going to put up a resources page in the comments. I'll put it up on the screen here as well. I also have a free book that's called 7 Steps to Plotting Your Novel Quickly. Again, this is one of those things that if you do things in a different order, it's really not going to break my heart. In fact, nobody will ever know. You can do them in whatever order that you want, but it gives you an outline for how to properly plot each novel within the series. And to do it quickly so that you can get on with the writing process. That resource page will have links to Plotter, it'll have links to Scrivener, it'll have links to a number of articles that talk about the various different ways to plot your novel and some different templates. There's some different templates and formats and things that you can do. So explore those resources, use what works for you, whatever doesn't work for you, happily throw it out. I'm also always welcome to feedback if you think I missed a resource or if you think that there's a resource said that shouldn't be there, do please let me know. I'm absolutely open to those things. I'm excited to hear from all of you, and I'm also excited to see what series you produce through the things that you've learned here. I'm going to open it up to questions. I'll be around live and I'll be in the chat. And even if you don't encounter me now, find me somewhere at the conference. I'll be around on several different panels. I'll be in rooms in between those. And tomorrow I do have a panel on book advertising, on paid advertising, and I talk about whether it's a budget buster or a book booster and how you can make it work for you. So thanks for tuning in again. Thanks for joining me for this second hour. I hope that you got a lot out of this presentation. And now it's open for questions. And if I don't see you in the questions, I'll see you soon. Thanks for coming.